morning. I'm a technical product manager on Polarion team, here to talk to you about what's new in the Polarion 21 R1 release, which was released last Tuesday. So I got half an hour to really walk you in high level on what was the additions in the new release. Many of them have been covered already by Zdeněk. High levels, I'll go more into the depths and really talking about what was done as enhancements, new functionalities to the release, and how we're going to continue with some of those functionalities. Just a few words about myself. I'm a technical product manager on Polarion team. I have been with Polarion for a very long time, 13 years now. I'm responsible mainly for all sorts of technical subjects within Polarion team, and also covering bigger domains of the enterprise readiness, enterprise administration, performance, and scalability, and really working mostly on with our customers on these subjects, and also helping them as in the escalation edge role on really resolving their most immediate issues that the customer have with the system quite successfully, I would say. So let's go right into the presentation, and I would just like to start quickly with refreshing the 4 swim lanes Zdeněk was talking about: the agile lifecycle, elevated experience, interoperability, and the cloud. The improvements are organized in these 4 swim lanes. So let's start not in this exact order, but we will start with the elevated experience, which was the swim lane, which got the most attention for the 21 R1 release and got most of the improvements implemented. So the going outline, big focus of this release was on the collaboration on top of documents. So the biggest addition in the release is something we call collaboration notifications, which help concurrent modifications of the document by multiple users by building awareness. What are the other users working on the same document, preventing potential conflicts on top of the document, helping the users to synchronize with each other on some bigger changes that need to be done to the document. We intentionally don't want to go in a way of locking the documents, doing the changes or by one user only. We rather want to enable the concurrent modifications by multiple users on the document, because we know that's the nature of how our end users work with the system. So how do the collaboration notifications manifest in the Polarion user interface? It's by this new icon in the document editor toolbar, which shows the number of the users that are currently working with this particular document. With the 21 R1 release, this is one state, which shows the green icon, which means the person is working with the document. We don't differentiate any particular operation what the user is doing with the document yet, but we plan to enhance it. If you click on that icon, you expand the list of the users, so you can see up to 10 users who are working with the document, and you can see there is this one more link that opens additional view, a dialog on top of this list, which also provides you with a filtering functionality. So if there's really many users viewing the document, for example, you can really filter them out to be able to find specific person. And we plan to do some further usability improvements. You can also very clearly see if you are the only one person working with the document. In that case, the icon in the toolbar doesn't show the number of the users, but just you. So it's very clear that you are in the document alone, and you don't need to worry about any concurrent modifications by other users. There's also a third state, which is not indicated here, and that's when the we call it notification service is not connected to your Polarion client. In that case, the icon is grayed out, and the state is updated when the connectivity is reestablished. This functionality is implemented in a way that it's really push notification. So it shows the changes in the real time to really always reflect on the current state of the editing or concurrent collaboration on top of one document without browser refresh. So all the users have always up-to-date information who is working on the same document. Just so that this functionality needs to be enabled, it requires enabling by special configuration Polarion property, and it connects to additional microservice, which we call this notification service, which in standalone instances run on the Polarion box. For clustered instances, it runs on the side to the Polarion coordinator. So this service using WebSocket technology requires some additional minimal configuration. It's a very thin service. And once you configure that, you will be able to leverage benefit of this new functionality. We definitely encourage all our customers to set it up because it's incredibly useful. We have been using it successfully internally, for example, when collaborating on top of the new and noteworthy block on our new release. And we really love the functionality. We don't stop here. The functionality will be evolved further by differentiating the different states, and not only the green state when people are viewing the document, but also really bringing more awareness about modifications to the document and possible save that can cause conflict with your modifications. So stay tuned. The implementation is ongoing to be concluded in 21 R2 release in October. This was not the only improvement. That was not the only improvement that was done to the concurrent modifications and editing of the document. We also focused on the actual merging of the concurrent changes that are done by multiple users to the document. So we overhauled completely this concurrent changes dialog, separating it into two dialogues actually that show be different content. So we separated the state when there were concurrent changes detected and they were safely merged by Polarion, but it's still advised for the user to actually review how Polarion merged those changes, because of course we don't semantically interpret really the logical changes that come together that must be done by the editors of the document. And the other state is the new dialog for conflicting changes, which clearly says kind of error message in red, stating that some changes done by other users will be overwritten, and therefore these changes will need to be remerged and kind of recomposed manually by the end user. You can also see that we more clearly separate the different changes done to the document on this conflict changes dialog, because some of them can be safely merged, some cannot. So we very clearly indicate to the user what changes can be merged and which not. And we also indicate in this very dialog what other user was actually doing the modifications in the document. So you can reach out to that other user immediately by your favorite communicator like Microsoft Teams and really synchronize about the changes that he's doing to the document to really follow up on the conflict. We also improved overall logging, so now it's much easier to actually detect these concurrent changes from the Polarion log, so we can also draw some statistics internally about these improvements. Next on the elevated experience is much requested functionality, and that's possibility to have permissions on field level for documents. So with the new release, you are able to lock or hide fields of document based on the custom sets kind of adherence of the document. So if your document reaches particular step in the workflow, for example, it gets approved, your users or some roles will not be able to modify some particle values on the document. Like similar functionality that is already available there for the work items and very, very useful. Is also ported back to the documents, so you can really set up granular process controlling what can be modified as attribute of the document in which workflow state of the document. And this is very, very useful because it helps you really achieve following scenarios. For example, assigning unique document ID that is somewhat auto-generated during creation of the document. It can be modified afterwards. Like locking the version field once your document is reaching a kind of in-edit state, for example. Prevent modification of version or owner of some risk assessment custom fields when document is approved, or for example, I don't know, filling quality assessment on the specification by only your quality manager. Currently, most customers have been addressing this need by, for example, save hooks on top of a document, but of course it doesn't really meet the usability standards. So we want to bring the functionalities of different parts of Polarion closer together and provide the same experience. So we brought the evolution from the work items here into the documents, and there are also other areas where this kind of improvement is desired. For example, in the test runs. So if you have that need, please share your feedback through enhancement request, and we really follow closely your votes on these enhancement requests to prioritize the further improvements on the usability of Polarion through this elevated experience stream. Next, I would like to talk about the improvements that we've done to the cloud. It's a little bit on the boundary of the cloud-related improvements and the elevated usability, and that's probably the biggest bang in the 21R1 release, and that's the reworked authentication mechanism. So this was really a substantial project that had a number of the goals in mind, particularly for the cloud deployments. Our need was to really enable configuration of the authentication through the user interface of Polarion. Right? Additional benefits that this real authentication works, that you can now authenticate Polarion users against multiple authentication providers at the same time. What does it mean? That you can have multiple DEP databases, or you can, for example, bring your suppliers, your customers, to work with you on your data in your Polarion instance while still keeping those third-party users authenticated against their own identity providers. So you don't need to bring them into your identity management system, right? So it's really incredibly useful for really fostering the collaboration within your Polarion instance. This is additional consideration. So for example, you can now configure for each individual users which of the authentication provider the user uses. Of course, there is one default provider that will apply for majority of the users to make the configuration as easy as possible for the end users. The new administration page for this authentication is employed with extensive validation, which again helps the administrators to set up everything right. Of course, the configuration change also comes with caveats. It really requires reconfiguration of existing installations because most of the types of the configurations are not backwards compatible. So we encourage the administrators updating Polarion instance to 21R1 to really study the documentation. We provided a new authentication guide of Polarion that is part of our Polarion help. So please study it up front, look up the changes that need to be done to authentication, and test it out before you actually do the upgrade of Polarion. On top of these authentication improvements, there were also additional benefits brought by this implementation. So just list them in a couple of bullets. So we also focused on actual security, and for example, one aspect of that was renewal of certificates for SAML single sign-on, right? Because the SAML tokens are encrypted on the identity provider side, and those encryption certificates typically are valid for a year. So there needs to be some period when the certificate is renewed. Currently, Polarion doesn't support multiple certificates, but from version 21R1, we can really read multiple certificates, so the old one and the new one from the identity provider, which makes the renewal of the certificate much more seamless. Additional security improvement was possibility to store the LDAP bind passwords and the OAuth client secret in the user account vault, where they are encrypted safely, so they are not referenced, these passwords or secrets are not referenced anywhere in the Polarion configuration in the plain text. Therefore, you don't really expose your internal credentials anywhere. For example, if you are sharing your screen with a support engineer of Polarion or sharing your configuration files in a support case. Third improvement on the security side was also possibility to update account vault keys through the web services API. How is that useful? Well, in our case, for example, the service passwords used for connecting Polarion instances in Siemens network to the identity providers needs to be renewed. Their password needs to be renewed every 30 days. So really, our DevOps team is managing hundreds of Polarion instances that are used by our R&D teams. And updating the service account is really a very painful job if done manually, but with the possibility to update these records through the web services API, all this renewal can be fully automated through your favorite DevOps means, and again, very, very seamless for the admins just to implement it once, and then on your renewal day of your password, just trigger the automated job that takes care of the renewal on all the different machines. Okay, so that's about the new authentication rework. We also have more improvements coming in the agile lifecycle swim lane. So Zach already outlined tracking additional structure detail for test execution via something we call test record custom fields is a new addition for the Polarion test management functionality, much requested again by many customers. So what does it bring? You can configure custom attributes for test execution records. So you can really capture the verification data in a more structured way and help the users to guide them through the process. So when you have those additional attributes tracked on the test records, then of course it makes the process control easier and also the reporting easier on top of those attributes, because you know that they need to be, for example, filled, you know in what structure they are. So it's really easier to suck them from the verification results into your reports rather than from the existing comment fields. All these custom attributes are available also through the APIs, so you can already expose them through custom widget, through custom reports, and also fill them, for example, from your DevOps pipelines and test automation running in Jenkins or GitLab, like in our case. Not all the, let's say, desired functionality was implemented in the current release. So of course you can come up with possible improvements, like really making some of the attributes required, making them read-only in some particular states. So that functionality is not yet implemented. We are looking for the customer feedback. This functionality was more implemented as a foundation for further work that we plan in the next releases, but it's useful as is, even for the current customers. So we provide it as an additional benefit to our customers of our test management, especially those customers that will use Polarion for mechatronics implementation, where these kind of attributes that maps to the physical dimensions of the products being tested are needed to be stored in more structured fields. Okay, the last swim lane was the interoperability, but definitely not least, right? The possibility to connect Polarion to third-party tools and exchange data with other tools is super important. And we know for a fact that there is multiple tooling typically used by a customer that connect to Polarion. So what we did on the connector improvements, the RecIF brings new auto mapper functionality that makes it much easier to do the mapping of the attributes and work item types when importing a RecIF file to Polarion. It comes with 2 steps. In the first step, you can very easily map the work item types contained in the RecIF file to the work item types in Polarion. And in the second step, we allow you kind of bulk map the attribute of the different types through aggregate list of these attributes, right? So if the chapter name is always supposed to be mapped to the title, you can do it in one step for all the different types, and also we can use smart recognition of the name and IDs of the fields to kind of set up the mapping upfront for you, where the mapping is straightforward. So this really greatly simplifies configuring of the mapping of the attributes during the RecIF import. More improvements have been done to the Jira connector. So we can newly synchronize planning data with Jira and Polarion. What does it mean? That we can synchronize the blend in field to the Jira fix version. So for example, if you use Jira to fix your defect, then you can import in which release the defect was fixed into Polarion to use that information for reporting. And together with that, we can also synchronize the actual plans, right? So if there is a version in Jira that doesn't have a counterpart plan in Polarion, the plan in Polarion representing the Jira version will be automatically created if you configure this planning data synchronization with Jira. Additional improvement is about retaining local attachments on synchronized work items with Jira, which means that you want to synchronize attachments that are provided by your customer, but still have your own attachments actually on the same copy that should really remain private and shouldn't be synchronized to your customer. So that was not possible in the previous version of Polarion, and it's possible now. On the OSLC support, we improved how the federated data are displayed on the work item form. So now you can display the external federated links in a separate section on the work item form, and this separate section kind of provides additional configuration. So you can have, for example, multiple sections on the work item form, one for the change request coming from a federated system like Teamcenter, and one, for example, with the system requirements, and this additional section showing the link work items or objects from the federated system can also show additional attributes right into the work item detail context. So that means you don't need to really chase the details, for example, for which version the system requirement is supposed to be addressed, or what is the cost or version of that requirement. You can really expose all those additional attributes directly in the work item interface view, therefore getting the data much more quickly in the context of the work item you are viewing. In the general connector framework, we also did additional number of improvements that really span over all the connectors that use the synchronizer framework. One is about improved logging, which is supposed to really more easily troubleshoot the problems with the synchronization. And second, really allow the administrators and users of Polarion to monitor the progress of the synchronization. So we really refined granularity of the logging to show just enough information so you know everything at the right time. We also improved the robustness of the connectors, especially if you are connecting or synchronizing with a remote system, for example, your customer's Jira that is running in the cloud. So we can now really detect network issues or random errors coming from the third-party system and retry in case of some expected failures. So your sync is not interrupted by these faults, but Polarion really tries to retry a couple of times to get rid of those problems. Third improvement here is the reduced memory allocation with lazy load of attachments, which really helps scaling the synchronization, which is important, especially for the initial synchronization of the data from one system to another. Right, initial sync can be really several thousand of work items or tens of thousands of work items to be synced. So we want to make that experience for the admins as seamless as possible. Okay, 2 more slides. We did still further enhancements, more enhancements that are scattered all over the Polarion. Some are targeted towards the collections that are still being actively developed. They talked about the upcoming collections branching, but we also did smaller improvements in the 21R1 release. One is that you can now report on collections in live reports by showing collections in the table widget. So really collection is being made first-class citizen for the reporting. We also enhanced the number of the custom field types available for the collection. So you can now use single enumeration custom fields for collections, and the multi-enumerations are coming in the next release. And we also had the possibility to create live references or live links to the collections by pasting URL of a collection or a baseline to rich text editor. Then we did a few additional usability improvements. We introduced new structured field, custom field type of type table. So it really can help your users to track structured information in the work item field as a structure which is predefined kind of columns, similar, for example, to the test steps field. And we also introduced this functionality into other scenarios like imports and exports. We added visual query editor to the newly introduced control chart widget, which we have for the last release. And together with that, we also provided the Lucene query parameters for the widget. So if you want to use the visual Lucene query builder outside of the data set as a widget developer, you can do so in the new release. Small improvements, still has collapse all action in the document outline sidebar to really simplify navigation across big documents that have many headings. And we also unlock the freeze unfreeze actions on top of reference work items for the QA license users. On the administration improvements, just two more things that I wanted to highlight here. So one is changes in our patch process. We are now distributing the cumulative patches as full update packages, so they're easier to deploy and they have specific build ID, so it's easy to identify what patch version you are on. And we also rework the send feedback action in the live configuration panel, so you can really use it as a Polarion admin to collect the feedback or drive the users to your feedback project in Polarion in case you create that feedback on Polarion side. That was on the enhancements. My last slide is on the performance and scalability, favorite topic. So we focused on two specific scenarios. One was the loading of the document structure into move work item dialog, which was optimized and now loads the document structure in less than a second. Second area was optimizing the object enumerations loading by additional caching, which was done mostly because of speeding up the global query panel loading, but it also positively impacted other scenarios. One side effect of this authentication improvement was also optimized communication authentication to the subversion. So especially for subversion heavy operations, we have great benefit here, improving heavy operations like imports and saving changes to the document that are some 15 to 40% faster, and on the initial imports even more. Our scalability tests show that the write operation during the scalability test is 26 to 36% faster on our 2000 concurrent user test on 10 million repository. And big project that we are partially concluding for this release and partially continuing was also improvements on the indexing. We know that particularly objects that have very long history, like test runs with manual executions that execute thousands of test cases, they can take a long time to index. So we reduce the time significantly for the upcoming version. And we also have new skip history caching, as we call it, as a early access feature, but already enabled in the release by a specific property that introduces this smarter caching that reduces subversion communication, which especially for environments that have slower access to subversion, like cloud deployments or cluster deployments, can really greatly speed up the historical indexing phase. We still know about some particular caveats, so we definitely encourage our customers to give us feedback about this new functionality because it's very data specific. So if you are really looking for trying this functionality, speeding up your DB historic rate indexing, and you want to try it out, please let us know if you encounter any issues and would like us to fix it. So that's all on the improvements that I had on the 21R1 release. Now it's time for your questions.